Welcome back, everybody. Monday morning show off and rolling here on an Overreaction Monday. Our guy Jeff Kolpak will join us in about a half hour. A high school football recap coming. Got to give a shout out to the Breckenridge Cowboys. They won the 6A championship as they beat Parker's Prairie. They're moving on to state, going down to Morris coming up later this week. We'll have more on that coming up later on in the show. This is when I love having our first guest here to start Monday after what we saw this past Saturday in FCS football. As I'm calling the game, and the Youngstown NDSU game was right down to the wire, Sam Herder. Then I'm seeing all the scores come in from across the country, and I'm like, what in God's green earth is happening this weekend when number 2 loses, number 4 loses, number 6 loses, number 8 loses? Well, November football's here, I guess, is the best way to sum it up.
Yeah, and real quick, shout out to the Cowboys. That's my hometown team right there. My dad's still on the coaching staff. He's been coaching for 30 plus years, I'm pretty sure. So shout out to Breckenridge making it to state. And this Saturday in FCS football was one of the crazier ones that I can remember. It seems like we have a chaotic weekend at least once every season. I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a crazy weekend. I can't remember specifically what all went down that one. But yeah, this one, it wasn't even the teams losing, but it was the fact that, of these upsets that happened, 6 of them came to unranked teams. And especially when you have that many in the top 10, like UND, SDSU, UC Davis losing to unranked to unranked teams, just creates chaos. And it makes it a bit more interesting, especially I still think we're probably going to have the usual suspects late in the playoff bracket, but now like it seems like maybe there is, at least from teams like quarterfinal, second round level teams, like there could be a bit more parity kind of in that second tier in the FCS this year.
Let me ask you this in terms of, because we have our last ranking come out Wednesday, which good luck committee on trying to put 1 through 10. Did this clear it up in terms of 1, 2, and 3 with the results that we saw that for between NDSU, Montana State, that it's somewhere in that mix that no matter what happens the last couple weeks, that's going to be the deal?
It kind of seems so. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I still think Tarleton State is going to be in that 4 spots this week. And if they do win out, I still think they would deserve overall a top 4 seed, or a number 4 seed, I should say. The top 3, I think is probably set. I mean, you never know. I mean, Montana State could lose to UC Davis and Montana, and then we're talking, a different thing here. But I think now, even with UND and Tarleton State losing, I think NDSU could afford a loss.
I agree.
And still be a number 2 seed behind Montana if Montana wins out. Whereas last week we were saying, well, if Tarleton wins out and UND wins out, that's a different discussion as far as where NDSU lands. So it gives NDSU a little bit more leeway, but I could still get a top 2 seed even if they drop one more game. The Montana State game, I think the winner there could be, if both win out until that point, the winner could be the 2 seed, and then the loser could still be the 3 seed. We've seen in past years where the loser has dropped really far down. I don't think that would necessarily be the case this year, just because, I mean, you would probably take a Montana State team that loses one more time over a Tarleton State team, in my opinion. So the stakes are going to be very high in that Brawl of the Wild, but I don't think the loser is going to drop as far as they have in past years.
Did the stakes drop a bit in your mind for the game this weekend in Grand Forks? In my mind, they did.
A little bit on the NDSU side of things. I think they did because, again, this with Tarleton losing and UND losing, that gives NDSU a bit more a wiggle room to suffer, a potential loss. I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen or not. For UND, I do think this ups the urgency a little bit, because before we were saying, okay, you should win your 2 other games, and then if you split North Dakota State, South Dakota State, like you're probably looking pretty good for a first round bye. Now, if you lose to both of these teams,
oh boy,
you're sitting at 7-5, and I think the bubble might be a bit weaker this year, and so I can see a 7-win team make it in, especially if you're a UND and you have this level of strength of schedule, which I believe is projected to be number 1 in all of the FCS. But if you're at 8 wins, you're for sure, in the playoffs. If you're UND, if you're 7-5, 7-4 versus the FCS, like you're nervous because you don't know what the playoff committee is going to do. So now all of a sudden, I think for UND this weekend, it kind of ups the ante a little bit even more, knowing like we got to get one more win over a ranked team. And then who was it? Murray State, I think they
Correct. They
play.
have Murray sandwiched in there. Yep.
Yeah, you got to handle business there, obviously, but you got to go 2-1 down this stretch instead of 1-2.
All right, let's talk about the most inexplicable losses of the weekend. I'll get to Davis at Idaho State in a second. South Dakota State losing to Indiana State, no one had on their bingo card. The Jackrabbits were a 31.5-point favorite. I don't care if your starting quarterback, your starting linebacker, starting best wide receiver aren't playing. You don't lose to Indiana State at home, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it was such a weird game to watch because there just didn't seem like there was a sense of urgency for South Dakota State to win this game. And we even saw that last week against NDSU. Like there just wasn't that sense of urgency you felt to start that game against NDSU. And this weekend, maybe it was like maybe the players, felt like they assumed they were going to get a win. And Indiana State gave them obviously a really good fight. And it was interesting that, South Dakota State, they moved the ball decently well. I feel like they crossed the 50-yard line on a lot of drives, and then they ended up with a turnover or a turnover on downs. And so like they moved the ball decently well, but they couldn't get a consistent push, in the run game. Luke Marble, who also got beat up a little bit, so
Yep.
he might be out. It sounds like Chase Mason could potentially be back this week. He's now out of his walking boot. But Marble this last weekend he made some really good throws that you go, okay, you could see the potential, but you also saw some throws where he just didn't see a guy, dropping back in coverage and pretty much threw it right to the defense. I think South Dakota State threw 2 interceptions, I believe.
Yeah.
They probably could have thrown 5 or 6, just because, as a redshirt freshman, you just didn't see some of those defenders. So yeah, it was a bad game for South Dakota State. And yeah, like you said, even with losing those 3-star players, they also lost like Lothridge. He left the game. I saw Hagan, who's probably their best offensive lineman. He also left the game. Quarterback, they lost potentially another quarterback as well. So the injuries are mounting up. But I mean, Tarleton, they've won some games with their backup quarterback. Monmouth has been winning games with their backup quarterback.
Yep.
UC Davis last weekend, they won a game with their backup quarterback. So I mean, it's somewhat of an excuse, but at the same time, like other teams are battling injuries too, and they find a way. And so I think depth for South Dakota State has really been tested, and the depth isn't where they need it to be this year.
Yeah, to me, offensively aside, the Jack defense has not looked good. Didn't look good, obviously, against the Bison. Indiana State, I know they didn't get 200 yards, but they still had some big plays against the Jacks. That, to me, is what is happening here?
Yeah, I think the thing with South Dakota State's defense, and like you said, against NDSU just wasn't a good performance. Against Indiana State, played well for, 9 out of 10 snaps or whatever, but they let a couple of explosive plays in key moments where the offense needed the ball back to somehow find a way to score, and then Indiana State would hit an explosive play late in the fourth quarter to kind of seal it. And so I thought their defense played pretty well. They just allowed some explosive plays. There were some bad penalties in there as well. So that's just something you're not used to seeing from a South Dakota State team.
I thought we were set, and then I saw your tweet on the Davis-Idaho State game. I'm like, all right, here we go, flashing lights, red alert, and then Idaho State beat UC Davis.
Yeah, and that was another crazy one. And, Davis had some bad mental errors as well in that game. And Idaho State has been a team that's kind of hung around. I think they have 2 one-score losses to FBS opponents. Idaho State also played Montana, a really close game as well. So they've been right there. And had this been UC Davis at Idaho State, like going into it, it would have piqued my interest a little bit more. But since it was at Davis, you kind of go, okay, Davis should handle that one. And Davis did get Pinnock back. They're really good young freshman quarterback. He missed last week due to a sickness. He came back this week and played pretty well. He had some turnovers, I believe. But yeah, that was another surprise right there in the FCS.
The other we were following was obviously the game in Vermilion, and USD had to have it to save any sort of playoff hope, and they came out with their best game of the year. UND looked like we haven't seen them all year, Sam. They looked lost. They turned the football over. Special teams, which was a big thing, and how the Bison won was a huge thing, and how South Dakota won the game too.
Yeah, it was a mistake-filled game, and I think that's kind of the a recurring theme here for some of these teams that got upsets. They just made way too many mistakes, and that was the case with UND, who I thought played pretty well defensively most of the game, and offensively they moved the ball pretty well. But whether it be turnovers, Just really some bad penalties, some special teams things going on for UND. It was not a good week to have
No.
your worst performance of the game, and they still had a chance to win, and just some uncharacteristic things. I think Kaminsky had like a crazy like 22-1 touchdown to interception ratio going into this one, and he throws a couple of picks. Some of them were just kind of mental errors on him where
Yeah.
he wasn't even trying to force it. He just kind of threw it out there and it was picked off. So it was an uncharacteristic game for UND. Maybe they were looking ahead a little bit, and you go up against a team like USD who needs to win it.
Yep.
You're playing a desperate team on the road. Like you can kind of understand how this one got away from UND a little bit.
I pair that with Tarleton losing to Abilene, and Abilene had to win too. They were 4-4 and have to win out probably to make the FCS playoffs, and that's a rivalry game. That's a big win there. I look at Tarleton losing and UND in a different light than I'd say USD or UC Davis and SDSU losing, because they lost to non-playoff teams that they were heavy favorites over at home.
Yeah, I wrote that too. That there were kind of different levels to these upset losses, and you could see, like, you could kind of pencil out, okay, I can see how Tarleton State loses. I can see how UND
Yep.
loses on the road, and like even like Northern Arizona losing to Idaho. Okay, Joshua Wood is back. That kind of makes sense. Austin P got upset by Southern Utah. Like that also kind of makes sense because Southern Utah has been kind of a pesky opponent. Lamar losing to UIW. Like I haven't been super impressed with Lamar.
Yep.
And so some of these upsets, like they're all bad losses. Like none of them you could say like, oh, that's a fine loss because they all knock you back. But there are levels to it where, the SDSU loss was definitely the most puzzling one. The UC Davis loss was also a really bad one. But like Tarleton State losing to Abilene Christian, again, a team that was desperate to keep its playoff hopes alive.
Yeah.
It's a bad loss in the sense that it knocks Tarleton State back. It probably drops them, or I would say for sure drops them out of top two playoff seed discussion. But overall body of work, if Tarleton State wins out, they're still going to be 11-1 with a couple of ranked wins, FBS win. Like they'll still be a top 5 team, I would guess. But this just knocks them back as far as being in that discussion as a top 2 team.
Before we get to your spotlight games for this week, the playoff ranking will come out Wednesday. If I was doing it, I would have the Bison 1, Grizz 2, Cats 3, Tarleton 4. Would you change anything there, or would you go that same 4?
I think that's going to be the 4. I am curious about what they do with Montana State and Montana because they did have the Cats ahead of the
right.
Grizz.
They did.
And they both have mostly dominated. You could actually argue that Montana State has dominated more than Montana. The Cats have more than the Grizz just in the last month or so. Yet the Grizz still look really, really good. So I'll be interested to see what they do with Montana State and Montana. I can see them doing NDSU 1, the Cats 2,
Okay.
and then Montana 3, Tarleton State 4, just because they had the Cats ahead of the Grizz the last time. And
Yeah.
they're obviously going to play, so maybe it doesn't really matter who's 2 and 3 because whoever wins is going to get that 2 spot, assuming NDSU wins out, which is not a guarantee. But that's going to be the top 4.
Okay.
How they do the 2 and 3, how they kind of arrange that, I think will be most interesting in that top 4.
All right. It's just amazing how what happened may have cleared things up for us in terms of how we're trying to project things for Thanksgiving weekend is kind of wild. All right, let's give your top games, what you got coming up this weekend.
Yeah, NDSU going to UND. That's going to be a phenomenal matchup. The Bison haven't played well there the last 2 times they've played there, and this is not a must-win for UND, but you feel like the sense of urgency for UND is going to be very high in this one. Mercer goes to Western Carolina in the SoCon. 2 teams that are hot right now, riding really long winning streaks, so that's a fascinating one in the SoCon. South Dakota State goes to South Dakota. We're on Chase Mason watch again because it sounds like he's moving around pretty well. And they're just a different team with him in. But even when he returns, there's still other concerns for South Dakota State. And this is a huge opportunity for the Yotes. Staying in the Valley here, Southern Illinois goes to Youngstown State.
That's a biggie there.
There's some big games coming up here. When you look at Southern Illinois, Youngstown State, Illinois State, USD, like Those 4 teams are all still in the playoff mix. SIU has a non-D1 win, so the Salukis really need to get some wins here down the stretch. So those are 4 really good games. And even like UC Davis, Idaho is a good one. Southeastern Louisiana, Lamar is a good one. Rhode Island goes to Elon. New Hampshire goes to Monmouth. So this is a really big week. And I think 4 ranked matchups, possibly 5 ranked matchups, depending on how the rankings come out. So a massive week coming up here.
I think that SIU Youngstown game it's going to play out. Colpack, I think, has 6 from the Valley. I'm not there yet. I'm at 5, but that could shake with USD winning. That maybe they could get 6 in this year.
Yeah, I think there's going to end up being 5, but it kind of also depends on the results.
Yes.
Like I think Southern Illinois and Illinois State play, like there could be some result. Like there could be results would have to go a certain way,
Yes.
but you could have 7 Valley teams with 7 D1 wins, or at least 7 D1 wins with good ranked wins that all have an argument to get in. 7 teams from one conference probably seems way too much.
Ain't gonna do that.
Even sometimes 6 is like that's a bit much, but I think it'll be 5. But there are scenarios where there could be more than 5 teams that at least have an argument to get in.
Although I'll end with this: who else you gonna put in? You know what I mean? If you got 7 Valley teams that are pretty good, put them in. You know what I mean?
Dartmouth and Harvard.
All right. I'm with you there now because the Ivy can do that. Great stuff as always, bud. We'll talk next week. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sam Herder joining us to start our show. Their great unpacking of what went down over this weekend. More on that coming up later on in the show. We'll break. We'll wrap up our first hour. Colpack coming up in hour 2 to give us his thoughts on the Bison victory over Youngstown and looking ahead NDSU's game in Grand Forks. Coming up is hour 1 wraps on Hot Mic on a Monday morning. Back after this.